We welcome Chris Balas from the Wolverine. That is on three's Michigan site, and it has been quite a busy day. Chris is at the golf course, probably not playing much golf because the University of Michigan has self-imposed a 3-game suspension on Jim Harbaugh. Chris, you wrote about this earlier today. What was the decision-making process, and what made them decide to do this now?
That's a great question. And when I was going to come on with you last week, I was going to tell you when they said, hey, this isn't going to happen until next year. I said, don't be so sure. People were still talking, and Michigan is Michigan. You know what? They don't take these things lightly, and sometimes they bend the knee when people don't think they should. And I think a lot of people think that's exactly what they did in this situation. So they're thinking about, okay, do we really want this to drag on? Do we really want to be the school that the NCAA comes after and tries to make an example of over, whether you can call it improper contact or buying a cheeseburger or whatever? They are already upset, as we can tell. The NCAA released a statement, which is just not in their nature. So I think they wanted to get ahead of it. And as Ward Manuel, the athletic director, said in this statement, he said, you know what? He said, we are working towards a resolution with the NCAA. We're hoping that this will be a step forward in that. But sources close to Michigan said this does not close the book on the Jim Harbaugh NCAA saga. I think that's pretty clear. It does for the Michigan assistant coaches, Sharon Moore and Grant Newsom, who will get a 1-game suspension and then be back on the sidelines for game 2.
And they've said they're not announcing the interim situation. And obviously, if Sharon Moore, who we would assume would be the interim, is out game 1, does that mean probably Mike Hart for the East Carolina game?
That's what we've heard. Maybe Jesse Minter, but Mike Hart, who's been associate head coach at Indiana, as you know, would probably be the guy. And then we've heard Sharon Moore probably for the 3 games or the 2 games after that before they play Rutgers and Jim Harbaugh comes back.
So it's interesting because to put this in terms people understand, I always try to put it in legal system terms, even though the NCAA is not the legal system by any stretch of the imagination. But they were negotiating a resolution, and that was the 4-game suspension. That was when we were talking about that. That's like the prosecutor and the defense negotiating a plea agreement, and then the judge rejecting it. The COI rejected that.
Yep.
It would seem to me that they didn't think 4 games was enough. And Chris, the one thing that I keep coming back to is the easiest comparison to this case is Jim Tressel at Ohio State, where he was, because as the NCAA, it's not about a cheeseburger. It isn't. The bylaw they're prosecuting Jim Harbaugh for allegedly violating is misleading information to NCAA investigators, which that's the same thing they got Tressel on. Tressel, if everybody remembers, now nobody remembers what happened because Tressel got pushed out of the job before his hearing, but he was suspended 5 games. So if this were to happen and Jim Harbaugh would be suspended for 5 games, he's got 3 games time served.
Right.
And then you could miss the first 2 of 2024, which does include the Texas game, but still not a significant chunk of the season.
Yeah, and in speaking to somebody close to Michigan just a little bit ago, they said the same thing. You know what? We could revisit this next year. It could be the case where this goes into next year. I asked, what's that next step? And I said, how long is this going to drag out? And he said, a year. And he said, you know what? It could be that they come back with another game or 2. And then the other interesting thing, he said, if Jim is still here, if he gets an NFL offer again, Andy, he might just say, screw this. You know what? I'm done with it. I'm done with the NCAA. I'm going to the NFL. And you know what? You guys can deal with this. But the one thing he doesn't want this to be is a distraction to his team. So when they came back to him and they said, you know what, 3 games, then I think he said, okay, if that's what it's going to take to get the focus back on my football team, then that's what we're going to do.
Well, it also helps that the games are East Carolina and UNLV and Bowling Green. It's not like they're very concerned. This team is going to overwhelm those teams with talent no matter what. And bonus, like you said, and Michigan fans get mad at me when I say that Jim Harbaugh may be the NFL next season. It's not like it's that far-fetched. He has talked to NFL teams each of the last 2 seasons. He is a proven NFL head coach. It's not like he's some dude who, we think he might. No. He's a good NFL coach. So that is something that is a possibility. And if that's the case, now you have Mike Hart or Mentor or Sharon Moore, who maybe you have auditioned at this point.
Yeah, I think Sharon Moore. I was talking to Fred Jackson, who was a former Michigan running backs coach and associate head coach under Lloyd Carr. He's now an analyst there. He said Sharon Moore is a star. He could have been somewhere last year. he can hold out for a better job because he is one of the rising stars in this profession. I could see Michigan doing that if Jim Harbaugh were to move on, saying, hey, we've got our guy in waiting here in Sharon Moore. Jim Harbaugh has said many times, Andy, that this is the guy. You know what? This guy is a rising star, and I could see him. He's ready to be a head coach. So do I predict it will happen? No. Who knows if the NFL is going to want Jim Harbaugh, but I can promise you that if that interview had gone better 2 years ago, Andy, Jim Harbaugh was taking that Minnesota job. He still got that itch, and it is really hard to get rid of that itch without scratching it.
Well, and that's the thing. It's very similar to the Ohio State situation where Urban Meyer got suspended for 3 games and Ryan Day got an audition, and they knew by the end of that season, Meyer was ready to step down. They've got their guy. And if that happens, they've got their guy. But this also, it is a fairly creative solution, I think, if Jim Harbaugh is still there, because if he was going to get 5 or 6 games out of this thing, that's a tough deal going into a season.
Yeah.
Now, if it's 2 or 3, you can probably deal with that.
Yeah, especially like you said, with the 3 games that it is. And Rutgers has given Michigan a battle 3 of the last 4 halves that they've played. So, you know what? They would love to have him back, and they're going to have him back. But one thing, Andy, you'd love to have this thing resolved and put behind you. That's certainly not going to be the case at this point. Now it's going to linger. It's going to be hanging over their heads. People are probably going to be using it against them in recruiting. So not ideal, but at the same time, you've got your head coach for the meat of a schedule in a year in which you are one of the favorites to win a national championship or at least get to the playoff.
But the threat of Jim Harbaugh not being there hasn't hurt them in recruiting yet. So I think at this point, they're impervious to that.
A little bit, and it's more the NIL stuff and battling the pay to play. They still need to get up there. They don't have the recruiting class that they should coming off of Big Ten championships back-to-back and playoff appearances, but they're still doing okay.
Yeah, this is just very interesting that this keeps going, but Michigan seems to have found a way to mitigate it however it's going to end up. So Chris Balas, thank you so much.
Anytime, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.